I want to introduce Edwin Renaud. He's going to be talking to us about attachment. And for those of you who don't know him, he's an LCSW and PhD. He began his career at the Veterans Administration, has worked with survivors of trauma for over 20 years. I first met Ed when he was the champion of trauma at Connecticut Mental Health Center before he transferred over to Connecticut Valley Hospital. He has published on the topic of attachment characteristics in combat veterans and working with trauma survivors in forensic settings. He's currently the Division Director of General Psychiatric Services at Connecticut Valley Hospital, and I'm really excited that he is willing to talk with us today. So I turn it over to Ed, and I see him down there in my corner, so we're going to bring him up.
So good morning, everybody. My name's Ed Renaud. I'm a social worker, and I'm currently the Director of the General Psychiatry Division here at Connecticut Valley Hospital. And I'm so pleased to be here. I was part of the TAG initiative back at CMHC when I worked there several years ago, and just thought it was an enormously valuable enterprise for CMHC and for all of the organizations involved. And so what I'm presenting to you this morning is an abbreviated version of a presentation that I give in various parts of the state and here at DMHAS, really looking at attachment or trauma through the lens of attachment theory. And so, because there's, as I hope you'll be persuaded by the time we're finished, I think there's a lot that attachment has to say about how we think about trauma and vice versa. Really, the idea that I'm going to be presenting here is that trauma and attachment sort of represent two adaptations to different kinds of behavior, and that when trauma symptoms, trauma issues become prominent, it can have impacts on the attachment system, which lead to clinically meaningful manifestations that we see in our clients. And so that there's a lot of interplay between our stress response system and attachment, and that both of these are survival systems which we have evolved as social beings that need to operate within a social context in order to survive. And this is very much in line with John Bowlby's outlook on the subject, as we'll get to in just a couple of moments. I will talk unless stopped. So please raise your hand, speak up. I'm happy to answer questions. These things are a lot more fun and a lot more interesting to participants if you stop me and ask questions. I am the principal offender. I am a prime offender of checking emails and doing things while hearing presentations. But to the extent that you are interested in asking a question while I'm presenting, please do so. Because again, I think it makes it a little bit more interesting and a lot more useful for folks when that happens. What else? Okay, so I'm just going to start off. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by separating the people in the room who are over the age of 40 from under the age of 40. And I'm going to do that using a simple question, which is, who in the group knows what TLDR stands for?
Are you looking for an answer?
I am looking for an answer.
Too long didn't read.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Generally, the people under 40 know that. Generally, the people over 40 don't. TLDR stands for too long didn't read. It is one of those internet things that some of us didn't grow up with. And it's basically a way of summarizing the points of a particularly long discursion or discourse in a few short bullet points. And so the TLDR for this presentation really are four general ideas: attachments and our stress response, our survival strategies. Generally speaking, our attachment system facilitates long-term survival, whereas stress response system facilitates short-term survival. Chronic stress and trauma can lead to a stress response that displaces aspects of the attachment system. And the long-term impacts of this have clinically meaningful ramifications for the patients that we work with. And those are really the 4 points that I'm going to try to make over the next hour. I just think it's important to summarize that. And I'm just going to jump in by talking a little bit about John Bowlby and some of his assumptions. John Bowlby is really credited with being the first, sort of the founder, the articulator of what is considered contemporary attachment theory. And John Bowlby was a psychoanalyst who practiced in Great Britain. One of his more formative professional experiences was working with children who had been relocated from the cities to the countryside during the German Blitz. During the Second World War, Germany was bombing the major cities in Great Britain. Children were being relocated and separated from their parents, being relocated into the countryside as a way of protecting them. And so one of his early formative professional experiences was watching children as they went, or working with children as they were relocated. He was supervised and professionally influenced by somebody named Melanie Klein, who is also an analyst and whose ideas have a lot of intellectual descendants in how we think about working with disturbed kids. Bowlby, in contrast to the prevailing psychoanalytic dogma of the time, really took a biological behavioral view of attachment behavior. He really saw us as we're part of the animal kingdom, and that our behavior is geared towards our survival as corporeal and mortal beings. He observed that human beings engage in attachment behavior across place, across time, across culture, and concluded, based on those observations, that our emotional attachments must have some kind of survival value. And that was a very different way of thinking than the psychoanalytic sort of hegemony at the time. And it took 30 or 40 years for the rest of the field to catch up with him. And today, attachment and similar constructs of interpersonal psychology have a really prominent place in how we think about psychotherapy and treatment of various sorts. This is based on that, a few other observations. Human beings are born tremendously dependent on caretakers relative to other creatures. We are not gazelle. We don't get up on our feet and start walking 10 or 15 minutes after birth. We need a lot of care and a lot of support for a long time. And we develop a great deal after we are physically born. So, and just some of the more recent research, a human infant's brain volume increases by over 100% during the first year of life. That's a lot of development outside of the egg, outside of the body. And most of that growth occurs in what's called the gray matter. For just a review of your basic biology, the gray matter is the cell bodies of the neuron. The white matter is the axons, the wiring that goes to other places. And so the gray matter volume is considered really important in terms of processing. So when you think about gray matter, you're thinking about the actual processing capacity of the brain. And so that increases by nearly 150%. So that's a big deal because it's got a couple of interesting implications. It means that our brains, the organ through which we experience and figure out how to cope with the world, develops principally outside or after birth. And because of that, is influenced by the environment in which it finds itself. That has a lot of survival value because it enables us as human beings to adapt to the environment in which we find ourselves, in part because our brains are organizing informed by that immediate environment, both physical and interpersonal. If it gives you any insight into John Bowlby's thinking, a a little bit more than what I'm going to show you here today. The last book that John Bowlby wrote in his life was not a psychology book. It wasn't a book about attachment. It was a biography of none other than Charles Darwin. This was so central to his thinking. So it really, a lot of how we're going to describe attachment doesn't make sense or doesn't hang together very well outside that sort of evolutionary understanding of animal development and human development. So it's just really an important bit of business in terms of thinking about attachment. So one of the other concepts that, one of the foundational concepts that Bowlby described in thinking about attachment is that, his quote up here, life is best organized as a series of daring ventures from a secured base. And the idea of the secure base is essentially this, is and some of you might find some similarities here to the notion of rapprochement that you hear about in child development, Margaret Mahler's famous notion, where children explore from a place of secure space to a place of insecure space and then come back. We sally forth into the world and explore. We see what we see, and then we come back to the safe place. And so we do this both in a physical sense and in a psychological sense. With young children and infants, you see it in, how they, walk around, they'll, walk into the next room and then they'll look back to make sure you're still there and then they come back. It's basically a series of ever widening, the orbit ever widens, a circle of exploration and return to a safe place. And so this gives us a way of exploring the environment, of learning about the environment, and then coming back to a place of greater security. And so you see that through the lifespan, that circle of exploration gradually widens from that initial sort of dyad of the infant and the caretaker to the family of origin, your childhood peers. Adolescence sets in motion this whole other sort of jump shift, this sort of exponential sort of expansion of that social exploration and peer group. As we get a little bit older, that shifts into pair bonding, that shifts into identifications with work, culture, and society, and in some cases, in many cases, a sense of spirituality. And what it really means, or the idea is that, that initial sort of safe space, becomes a wider and wider circle as we incorporate, as we incorporate other people, as we learn the social world, as we mature. Any questions or thoughts about that so far? Okay. Now, Bowlby's idea was that when children were separated from caretakers, that they would undergo a sequence of responses. As in most things in psychology, things are not necessarily linear, and people sort of go into and out of and shift between these phases. But the idea is that the initial response to a child to the separation from their parents was one of anxiety, where the child, essentially sort of through behavior or vocalization or other things, expresses distress. I'm alone. I'm not being supported. I don't have what I need. Help me. This phase, this response, would then be followed by anger, which is in this model sort of thought of as a more declarative, more assertive demand for support. Whereas the anxiety stage is one where you're saying, hey, I'm not, I'm here, folks. I'm not being taken care of. Help me. Anger is more of an assertive, almost an aggressive statement of, I'm here. You need to take care of me. It's more imposing. It's more impacting into the environment. If that response, if anxiety and anger persist, the subsequent response is that of loss, which is sadness and despair at the loss or the experienced loss of that attachment figure. Now, the 3-volume set of John Bowlby's written work consists of 3 books, one called Attachment, the second called Separation, and the third called Loss. And they look something like this. You can still purchase them. Attachment was published in 1969, Separation was published in 1973, and Loss was published in 1980. And those are really sort of the seminal foundational works of attachment theory. Now, one of Bowlby's colleagues and collaborators was a lady named Mary Ainsworth, who was a psychologist. And Mary Ainsworth developed an experiment called the strange situation. Again, I'm doing a lot of Psychology 101 here, but I think as we move on over the next few minutes, you'll start to see why this stuff becomes important. And when you look at the strange situation experiment, which has been replicated a million times, it's actually it's a brilliant design. And I went back to the original article from Mary Ainsworth to put together this slide because it has been replicated so many times. I want to sort of give you the example of what she actually did. So the first step of the strange situation experiment is that the mom, and it's usually it was the mom, and it was the 1950s and 60s, and so the mother and the baby enter a strange situation. They enter a new space. The mom sits and interacts with the infant. Then a stranger enters, talks to the mom, and approaches the baby. Then the mom leaves. The stranger and the baby are alone together. And the mom returns. And the stranger leaves. And you watch and see what happens. Then, when the baby is settled, mom leaves again, and baby's alone. The stranger comes in, and you watch. Then the mother comes in, and the stranger leaves, and you watch. So, why is this significant? It introduces a certain stress point 3 times to the situation. There's a stress point when the baby and the mother enter the room. It is literally the strange situation. It's a new place. The introduction of the stranger, both in the interaction and being left alone with the stranger, is a stress point. It activates that attachment system. And then with the baby being alone, and then with the stranger again, is a stress point. And the experiment is what happens when the baby is in these particular situations. When they enter the new situation, do they explore? Do they stay close to the parent? What is the behavior of the infant when mom comes back? What's the reunion like? All right. So, and you don't want to do that just once, because once could be just an anomaly. So they actually set it up twice within this experimental design. So you see reunion behavior with the mom, not once, but twice, which gives you a little bit more of a reliable sense of how the infant's characteristic way of relating to mom actually is, what that actually looks like. So you've got 2 instances of reunion behavior to observe. It's a brilliant design. Now, from these strange situation experiments, they identified 4 prototypical attachment styles. And the reason for going through this particular set of information is that when you read attachment literature, you're going to hear attachment styles described very similar to this, and one more model of description, which I'm going to cover in just a couple of minutes. So this is in many ways giving you some background for your further reading. or if you do any further reading about attachment, you're going to hear these terms bandied around a lot, and it's useful to be familiar with them. So, and they're very similar, but they come from somewhat different emphases. So securely attached kids were comfortable being emotionally close to others. They weren't really upset by mom leaving. They reunited with mom in a fairly comfortable way. Your anxious kids, they were more visibly upset by the separation, and they were much more engaging upon the reunion. It was like, oh, thank God you're back. It was really they were clearly anxious about the separation. Avoidant children, on the other hand, showed much more resistance to reunion. They didn't necessarily show a lot of distress during the separation, and when the mom came back, they weren't particularly quick to reunite. They were wary in a certain way. And then, in some ways, the most clinically interesting, the most clinically challenging group was the disorganized children, who showed both approach and avoidance behavior. They clearly had some sense of wanting to be connected, but they were wary. This becomes really important later on when we talk about the impact of trauma and attachment. Okay. Now, Bowlby anticipated a lot of what we would today call cognitive behavioral thinking in terms of his writings on attachment theory. And in the attachment trilogy, you will read him describing attachment style being mediated by two internal schemas, if you want to call it that, two internalized ways of thinking. And one of those schemas is the internal working model of the self, and the other is the internal working model of other. So essentially, what Bowlby was suggesting is that the way we attach to others is influenced by the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we think about people in the environment, and that those two models were informative and were formative of how we relate to others. And so the internal working model of self, sort of poses the question: am I somebody who would be cared about? And are other people, and the internal working model of others is centered around the idea, are other people around me caring and trustworthy? And so based on that set of ideas, researchers have used that as a two-dimensional model. And just as Mary Ainsworth and her colleagues came up with these 4 attachment styles based on their observations of the strange situation, these researchers have used the sort of 2 axes of internal working models of the self and internal working models of the other to come up with their own sort of formulation of secure or attachment styles. And you see this model used in a lot of research on attachment. And again, so these 2 models have a lot of overlap, frankly, but it's important just to know the origin. So secure kids, positive working model of the self, and positive working model of the other. I'm okay, you're okay. Your preoccupied kids, more analogous to the anxious attached kids. They had a positive model of the other, but not of themselves, but not a positive internal working model of the self. Okay, followed then by your dismissive kids. Now this correlates more with the avoidant group, which is they had a more positive internal working model of themselves, less positive internal working model of others. They felt like they could count on themselves, but not on everybody else. And then finally, fearful attachment, which is correlated more with disorganized attachment, both negative model of the self and other. So not feeling like you can count on the people around you, and not feeling like you can count on yourself either. Again, when we think about trauma situations, that fearful dynamic, that disorganized dynamic becomes important in terms of thinking about how we understand the attachment dynamics of traumatized people. Again, I'm going to pause for any questions.
Hello, it's Leanne Mitchell from McCall. I think this is a great presentation, and I'm so sorry because I do have to head out to another meeting in a minute, but attachment is a huge part of the work that we're doing at McCall, especially with a lot of providing trauma services. I oversee family services, and one of our programs we use is Circle of Security Parenting. Are you familiar? Okay. All I was going to say is that it's a program for anybody listening and for yourself. If you're interested in attachment and learning a little bit more about the concepts regarding the parent-caregiver relationship, it's absolutely incredible because the people who created the program, they've managed to take these very, I think at times, big terminology about attachment and psychological theory, and they've put these very basic images and terms to it, where we're helping parents and caregivers start to understand why they might struggle sometimes with forming good, secure relationships with their own kids and where that comes from. And a lot of the times it's rooted in trauma and not having a good base to come home to, so to speak. So I wanted to put that out there. I wasn't sure if you were familiar with Circle, so.
So I practice mostly with adults, and so but I know how much attachment theory sort of infuses child work and work with families. So I really do appreciate that. So, but my perspective, unfortunately or not, is informed more by sort of thinking about this within an adult context. But absolutely, this material is used in the child welfare and the family support aspects of the field just enormously, and for all the right reasons. I am mindful that I've only gotten this far and it's a half hour, so so I'm gonna talk a little quickly. This is actually a shortened version of like a 4-hour presentation, so
yeah, I want to let the group know though that the last time Ed did the 4 hours here, we did record it and it's in our on-demand programs at the consortium. So if people want to see the full program, it is available. And Leanne, my comment to you is you might want to talk a little bit about that at our December meeting, because we're looking for people to share some information of things they're doing out in the field. So call out to you. I wrote your name down, and call us back if it's something you want to just spend a little time on. So thank you, and I'll go back to Ed.
Thank you for putting the link in the chat too. I appreciate that.
Yes, that was Sheila.
Okay. I'm also available for bar mitzvahs, weddings, and birthday parties. So I'm going to skip. I'm going to touch quickly on the social processing areas of the brain. What's interesting about this is that there are specific areas of the brain that process social information. I'm gonna sort of go through this really quickly so that we can get to some of the more interesting stuff, which is the clinical applications. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which you all are familiar with through your work with trauma, plays a huge role in assigning a value, assigning an emotional valence to people who as being either threatening or not, safe or not safe. This has implications for memory formation, memory consolidation, and therefore behavior. I am really going to move quickly through this part. The three hormones biologically that are most associated with attachment, they're not the only ones by any means: oxytocin, vasopressin, and serotonin. Oxytocin is the one you hear about every Valentine's Day. It's supposed to facilitate social connection. It clearly has some implications for social perception. Vasopressin, very similar, but tends to be more associated with the sort of boundary setting aspects of attachment. Serotonin, our friend serotonin, has a lot of impacts for mood, but also is associated with status on the social hierarchy, which has a lot to do with attachment, because where you fall on the social hierarchy has a lot to do with who you have available for mate choices, particularly in a social context. So there's a lot there. I want to talk about the thoughts and the work of a gentleman by the name of Peter Fonagy. He is a psychologist, psychoanalyst. His famous book is this one, Affect Regulation, Mentalization, and Development of the Self. It's sort of a classic in the field. And basically what he talks about is what he calls the reflective functioning. And really this is about our image of another person's mind. Mentalization is really about imagining the internal states of another person. Empathy is similar. Empathy is sort of understanding another person's outward expression, sort of, what are they feeling in the moment. Mentalizing is really sort of imagining people's motivations. It's a bit of an elaboration on the notion. Now, mentalizing is a continuum, and part of that continuum is informed by, what is the amount of information that we have to imagine another person's mind? Because we are gonna be able to mentalize with certain people better than others. So the person who cuts you off on the way to work, you're going to have a very limited understanding of what that person's about, and very little interaction. You're not going to have you're not going to have a lot to go off of in terms of imagining their internal state. People we see at work, people we know somewhat but not a lot, we may have some intermediate notion of what their thoughts and feelings are and what their motivations are. And then there's the people that we're the most close to, of which we have the most full mental picture. And so when we think about mentalizing, there's going to be a continuum of our ability to imagine the inner states of others based on our exposure, based on different things. So what's been found empirically is that secure attachment has been associated with the ability to mentalize more fully and more effectively. And that the ability to mentalize tends to arise from the experience of having one's own internal state understood accurately. So if we've been lucky enough to have people understand us, the chances are better that we will be able to understand other people. And that the conditions, the emotional conditions that give rise to that, emotional containment, physical safety, emotional safety, make it easier for children and adults to develop that mentalizing ability. All right. And so, one of the reasons why this is important is because so much of navigating the social world depends on our ability to understand the intentions and thoughts of other people. Okay. So not only our notion of how we understand them, but imagining how they understand us. So both first order mentalizing and second order mentalizing. First order mentalizing is, how do I understand this person? Second order mentalizing is, how do I think this person understands me? But all of that's still in our heads. It's not, it's an impression. It is an impression that we have evolved to be exquisitely good at, but it's still in our heads. Now, this leads me to the notion of second and third order thinking. This has some important implications for trauma. So our ability to think 1, 2, 3 steps out. Think about chess. When you're thinking about chess, when you're playing chess, you're never playing the next move. You're playing 2 or 3 games. You're playing 2 or 3 moves out. So being able to imagine not just the next behavior of the person you're interacting with, but the second or third. To be able to think proactively, to plan, to model the future. Think about the internal working models, internal working model of the self, internal working model of the other. Something that we're going to talk about in a few minutes is, what is our internal working model of our past, and how do we use that in combination with current experience to model what we expect from the environment and other people in the immediate future. That capacity is really important and gets injured through the experience of trauma. All right. Now, mentalizing has certain limits. Our vision of how we picture ourselves is never going to be how other people image us exactly. We live in our own bodies. We live in our own minds. We live in our own continuum of experience. How we see ourselves is never going to be the same thing, is never going to be the same as how other people see us. Similarly, the way that we see other people is never entirely exactly the way that they see themselves. And I'm just going to move through this very quickly. Now, the ability to imagine, to experience, and to recognize our own internal states has a lot to do, or has a strong association, let me put it that way, with our ability to understand other people's internal states. Conversely, people who have a difficult time understanding or being able to articulate their own internal state have correspondingly difficult time understanding the internal states of other people. Think about this through a trauma lens. So much of what we see in traumatized folks is that mind-body disconnect, where the ability to give thoughts and words and feelings and articulation to internal states becomes impaired. And this has all kinds of cascading impacts on people's ability to function in social interpersonal ways. An important notion that I think is we need to talk about in terms of mentalization is something called epistemic trust. And that's a very fancy way of posing the question, do you trust the sources of information that you are getting in the social world? Do we trust that the people that we are relying to are giving us the straight story? One of the major dynamics within our politics right now is that we have an enormous breakdown in epistemic trust. Depending on which news channel you watch, and I'm just going to say Fox and CNN for examples here, your idea of what the world looks like can be very, very different. And so where is the epistemic trust in that? Which source of information do you trust? Which source of information is telling you the truth, and which source of information is not? Think about that in an interpersonal way, where aspects of manipulation and mind games and gaslighting and things of that sort. Do you have trust in the people in your life and in your environment are giving you, are being authentic, are being truthful? When someone says, I love you, do they mean it? I mean, in the most basic sense. That's really what epistemic trust is about. Social perception, I'm gonna skip through that a little bit. It's really three parts. I mean, what are your basic senses detecting? What do you infer from that, from what your senses are detecting, and how do you respond? And social perception is a capacity that is not unique to human beings. And we see this in mammals all the time, and it goes across species. So, for this slide, example, you see the little girl and the little puppy. You can see that they're both a little bit forlorn. They're a little unhappy. You see the baby in the center who's smiling, is a joy, and the puppy is smiling. You can tell that it's happy. And then on the, at least on my far right, you can see that this particular puppy has lost a number of lawsuits and has significant financial trouble and associated feelings around that. Strongly opposes higher taxes on the top proportion of the income bracket. So we know that these things translate across species. I'm going to tell you a little bit about an experiment that was done in New Haven, or amongst other places in New Haven, at the Yale Child Study Center, looking at autism and social perception. What they did was they set up this wonderful experiment where they showed people clips of a movie, and this movie is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and they hooked up a little apparatus to the experiment, to the participants, that tracked their eye locations. In this clip of the movie, the two people in front are having a conversation, and the person behind them is listening. And when they watched their eyes, where they were tracking, they observed that the people who were neurotypical, as we would call them now, were paying attention to the participant's eyes and the ear of the person who was listening, the socially relevant parts. That's the yellow lines that you see there. The orange lines are the visual tracking of people with autism. they weren't paying attention to the socially relevant parts of the conversation, the things that neurotypical people attend to, the eyes, the ears. So when we're thinking about people with attachment difficulties, and I'm, we're in this context, we're using autism as sort of the outer edge of an example of where social perception is distorted. We may be looking at a certain manifestation where the things that they're paying attention to are just different than what other people are attending to, and what implication does that have for how you respond? Okay, I'm going to skip over Beatrice Beebe here, and I'm sorry. Again, I'm just looking at the clock and I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to be able to talk to you guys about some of the clinical stuff. A more contemporary set of thoughts and ideas about attachment has to do with co-regulation, sort of interactive co-regulation of affect. And one of the people who really started that discussion within the field is a guy named Alan Shore. And this is one of his books, Affect Regulation and Repair of the Self. And so his ideas are that the parent and the child do this dance within their relationship. And so the parent has their own capacity to regulate their own feelings, and that the infant and the child, come on now, the child has their own capacity to regulate their internal state, less developed than the adults, obviously, because they've lived less and they're less developed, but that they interact and they co-regulate one another. Now, if you've ever gotten up at 2 o'clock in the morning to feed a child, you have engaged in co-regulation. The child has sent you a signal by crying or behaving in whatever way, saying, I've dirtied my diaper, or I'm hungry, or whatever. And you have responded by meeting that need. So that they've sent you a signal, you responded, there's that interaction going on. And there is this sort of interactive co-regulation that goes on. It's a very fancy word for very fancy notion for saying we influence each other's internal states by our thoughts and our feelings and our behavior. Okay, and so this is a dynamic that goes on between individuals. One way of thinking about supervision is that you interact with the patient, you interact with your supervisor interacts with you, you interact with the patient, and there's sort of a conjunctive function where you take a little bit of what you get from other people and share it with other people that you interact with. And so, and we all live within this sort of web of relationships that are simultaneously impacting us and impacting people that we interact with. It's just complicated. The social environment, the social world is just very complicated because we are always having these multiple micro interactions and having these sort of influences on one another. And that's just like normal social life. Think about it. It's kind of a miraculous thing. Now, affect regulation is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and in a way that I think probably dilutes its meaning. And so when we, I work in a major adult psychiatric hospital, and so when I hear people toss around, terms like, they're being dysregulated, what that usually means is that they're acting badly, or they're being loud, or being out of control in some way. And people sort of sometimes use the idea of affect regulation as, stop being loud, stop doing bad things, whatever bad things is being defined as at that moment. I want to suggest to you a different way of thinking about affect regulation, where affect regulation is not merely about putting the brakes on intense emotion, but rather having an intermediate range of emotions between extremes that gives you a broader repertoire of responses to the environment, which can make you more effective in dealing with it. Okay, and I'm just going to use this. So, we kind of think of people who have borderline personality disorder or other sort of impaired object relations as sort of seeing people in terms of either all good or all bad. Now, that doesn't give you a whole lot of range. I don't know that that formulation is actually correct, but but for purposes of illustration here, it doesn't give you a lot of options in terms of how to respond to people. Again, thinking about this as a spectrum, affect regulation through a certain way of thinking is that ability to experience, number one, and number two, to occupy and act from a state of something between extremes. And again, the more sort of emotional and affective range that you have, the bigger your toolbox, the wider repertoire of responses you have to a very complex and not always predictable social environment. And so affect regulation is really about more than just being able to put the brakes on extremes, but actually to match your response to in the most effective way to the situation that you find yourself in. And again, this is thought to occur most effectively or most promisingly in the context of secure attachment. Let's see. And that flexibility is really important because that's what allows us as human beings to adapt and function in diverse social environments. One of the miracles, I mean, it really is a miracle when you think about it. One of the miracles of human development is that we develop so much out after birth that we are able to adapt to a huge amount of diverse environments. Again, that cognitive flexibility, that ability to regulate our affects in certain ways allows us to function and operate in diverse social environments as well. It's about flexibility and range. So, what happens when our stress response system and our attachment system are activated at the same time? Our stress response system is a survival system. And it's typically, more often than not, a short-term survival system, or at least it's intended to be a short-term survival system. Part of the trouble that we see with chronically traumatized folks is when that stress response system is chronically activated and never really gets a chance to settle down. What you see is that those attachment behaviors become impoverished because if you're so focused on surviving right now, there's not a whole lot of value in thinking about the long term because that's not what's going to keep you alive or keep you safe right now. All right. So there's good evidence that social support has an impact on increasing oxytocin levels and decreasing cortisol. We have a good sense that having good social support reduces the amount of stress hormones and the physiological stress reaction, and that's doesn't take some fancy journal to tell us that having friends and having people in your life is good for you. Just about everything out there supports that. We also know that social rejection leads to higher stress. Again, nothing earth-shattering here, but it's nice to have these things empirically supported. Now, one of the things that happens with trauma, as we all know, is that trauma has a way of creating alienation from other people, but also alienation from the self. There's a certain disconnect from internal states that occurs with severe trauma. Internalized feelings of shame, of negative self-image, emotional numbing. I mean, literally sort of the blunting of internal emotional states. And we see in trauma, hypervigilance and defensive behavior and isolation creates a situation where, as a way of preserving your sense of safety, you wind up depriving yourself of the beneficial effects of being socially connected because you've had the experience of social connection not only being sort of not rewarding, but potentially dangerous. Um, so, um, so what you see in insecurely attached people, in particular people who've got severe trauma issues, a lot of this looks like depression, and of course, the biology of depression and the presentation of depression is pretty has a lot of overlap with what we see in PTSD. We see a lot of people being treated for both. In psychiatry, I mean, our diagnostic constructs are not so clean and neat. I mean, the underlying biology, overlaps a lot. So, but what you see, so you do see a lot of depression in insecurely attached people. Social disappointment, social defeat creates a sense of wanting to be isolated, because that, frankly, it's better to be alone than to be rejected or punished. We also see this with anxiety disorders. Again, if being with other people is unrewarding or likely in your experience to result in being attacked or made to feel bad, you avoid it and you get anxious about it. Attachment and personality disorders, this gets obviously a lot more complex. Everything with personality disorders is complex, but what you see with chronic trauma and attachment issues with people is you see that internalization of trauma symptoms into personality functioning. Judy Herman's notion of complex PTSD is really all about that, where the repeated experience of people that you depend on being both needed and a source of danger at the same time, which is in many ways the definition of fearful attachment and disorganized attachment, becomes a central aspect of personality functioning. And it's hard to navigate the world in that way. It may be very adaptive for navigating that particular traumatic dynamic, but to generalize it into other parts of social functioning, work, romance, interpersonal relationships, can pose a lot of trouble, can pose a lot of problems. And of course, we see interpersonal attachment issues in the biographies of people whose trauma is interpersonally rooted. I mean, so many of the people that we work with have their traumas rooted in relationships with other people, which makes working with that very complicated. And I'm just gonna, so let me pause there. I mean, we've got about another half hour. I'm talking quickly, and I want to give people a chance to ask any questions if they've got questions at this point.
Feel free to put them in the chat box if you have them, or to unmute and ask them right now.
Just know that I can't see the chat box, so.
I will read them. If I see any, I'll let you know.
Okay. All right. So at the beginning of this, we talked a little bit about the internal working models of the self and other. And what we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes is this notion of autobiographical memory. And so one way of thinking, and it's a way of thinking that's sort of gained a little bit of traction and following in recent years, is that our experience of mental life consists of this simultaneous experience of the current world, our sensory input right now, our modeling of the past. Remember, the memory is reconstructive. Memory is not I'm going to date myself here. Memory is not a videotape. Memory is not an audio tape. For those of you of a certain age, memory is not a CD. I'm maybe even dating myself with that. Memory is not a flash drive. it's not a perfect representation of what really happened. It's a construction and reconstruction of events in our minds over the course of time. So our model of our past is our version of it, which may bear greater or lesser relationship to what other people remember about what happened. So we've got this system where we've got the current mental ideas of our or experience, sensation. We've got this model of what has transpired before, but then we're also simultaneously imagining the future. So I'm just using sort of Freud's old notion of love and work. So you've got somebody thinking, what am I going to do for a job? And you've got two people who are in love. These things can go different ways. Maybe you break up with a person, maybe you stay in love, maybe you decide to go to university, maybe you decide to become someone who's a mechanic. Maybe you break up with this person and maybe you fall in love with somebody else, or you decide to become a mechanic. I mean, the idea behind all this silliness here is that based on our current experience and the model that we have, this idea that we have of ourselves and the past that we bring to the moment, we project, we imagine, we model the future. And we do this unconsciously, instantaneously, all the time. If you're planning on what you're going to have for lunch, you are modeling the future. If you're thinking about the meeting that you've got an hour, you're modeling the future. We create, as a matter of course, again, one of the ordinary miracles of normal psychological functioning is we are simultaneously thinking about a future that's not yet here, but we are imagining different pathways in it based upon current sensory experience and this picture that we have of the past. Now, think about what this must be like for someone whose attachments are distorted. Think about what this must be like for someone who's experienced severe trauma. What is that future going to look like? What is the model of the future going to look like? What is the experience of the present? How is that going to be impacted by all of that? And this brings us to some of the clinical implications. If I can ever get this thing to start. Okay. So we've moved from this place in our way of thinking about human psychological life, from this place of, it was nature and nurture, and it was either all biology or all environment. And, back in the 70s, that's what they were thinking about. We've gotten to a different place where we know that environment and biology are reciprocal, that our biology impacts the environment and the environment impacts our biology. Okay. And that there's this interaction. All right. Another way of thinking about this is that we have this biological and environmental interaction, but it also happens over time. And so the who we are right now is not just the sum of interactions between our biology and our environment, but the latest note in a musical score of how those things interact. Okay? Where our biology is going to be playing a greater role in some ways at some times, and our environments are going to be playing a greater role at some times in some ways. And that the person that we find in front of us, that we treat, or even the person that we look at in the meal, is not just the sum total of their biology and their environment, but the latest note, the current note in that musical piece of the interaction of that biology in that environment over time. Okay. Trauma lives in our relationships. Okay. It's connected to the people that we've encountered over time. It's connected to the people that we have in our life right now, the people that we have the choice of interacting with and the choice of not interacting with. it leaves an autobiographical memory. And what do I mean by autobiographical memory? Autobiographical memory is the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. Okay. Now, that story comes from a lot of different places. Sometimes, some parts of that story are the things that people tell us about ourselves. You know, you're a really good writer. Maybe football is not for you. It's part based on the impact that or the experience that we get from other people, the feedback that we get from other people. But it's also how we think, our own sort of selves, about the experiences that we have. And because it's an autobiography, because it's a narrative, it's not, narratives are more than just an assemblage of individual facts. It's how those facts, how those points in the story are tied together, and the meaning which is attached to the connections between those moments. Does that make sense? That's what I hate about presenting online. I can't tell people are nodding, or I can't tell if I'm being funny or being offensive. It's just the idea is that the narrative that we tell ourselves is not just the textbook version of the sequence of events, but the meaning that we ascribe to the sequence and between events. Okay. Now, I'm going to pause here to make an important observation, is that racism and discrimination are forms of trauma, and they're forms of attachment injury as well. And this becomes really important when we start thinking about clients who are different than us. Okay. I think it's pretty evident in 2023 that, particularly, in what we know about social determinants of health and healthcare disparities, that, racism and discrimination are inherently traumatic. Think about this from a relational standpoint. If larger society, if your social context gives you the message that you're not as good as other people, that you are less than, or are somehow to be thought of as more dangerous because of qualities of yourself that you have no control over, what does that do to one's sense of trust? What does that do to one's sense of the internal working model of the self and the internal working model of other? Who is safe? Who is dangerous? Okay. So we have to be mindful in our work, particularly those of us who have privilege, that what is safe, what is secure, who you can talk to about certain types of things may be very different based on your sense of safety of the other. And if we are people who come from a position of privilege, we have to be really thoughtful in how we stand with our patients and our clients. I work in a hospital, so we use the word patient, I apologize. We have to be thoughtful about how we work with our clients in order to not replicate some of this stuff. And again, for those of us who have privilege, these things are so automatic and so sort of baked into the culture that it's sometimes easy to do, it's easy sometimes to engage in microaggressions without even realizing that we're doing so. So I pause there to make an important point. What I believe to be an important point is that people's attachments and people's trauma are going to be influenced by their sense of being treated as the other, even if it's not in the office, but by their social context. Pause there for a question or two before we jump into some of the clinical stuff. Anything?
I see nothing in the chat.
Oh boy, I hope I'm not boring people.
Come on, somebody. Pose a question. Get interactive. Come on, Ed wants to talk with you. Anyone? Just unmute.
I threatened to sing, but I have parole obligations I have to be mindful of.
They're being quiet today.
Yeah, okay. All right. So, okay, I'm going to forward it. So, when survival systems compete, they're both less effective. And so, thinking about both attachment and trauma as survival systems, what we see with our patients, with our clients, they've often been tremendously traumatized. Their ability, the quality and the style of their attachments has been impacted by those experiences. Okay. Again, the people that we need can be sometimes a perceived and genuine source of danger. And so what you see in those kinds of situations is that natural flight or fight or freeze reaction can be suppressed or exaggerated. And we see this in intergenerational dynamics where people go on to replicate, as a lot of us do, replicate early relationships in our current and future relationships because this is what love feels like. We create the dynamics that we know. Going back to that notion of affect regulation, depending on what your repertoire is, if you know that love is only this, but love can't be that, you're more likely to do this. And having that broader repertoire gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of what you can do and what you can accomplish in your relationships. From a clinical standpoint, you really want to prioritize working with trauma because that's going to do a couple of things. First of all, attachment takes root gradually, real attachment, not idealization. You start with addressing the trauma issues because that's going to get you some cachet right off the bat because you're helping with immediate problems. And you begin to establish yourself as somebody who can be helpful. When people are in a mindset of survival, their practical needs, their immediate needs are what's up front. If you're talking about, if you are in a survival mindset, talking about your long-term dynamics isn't going to be particularly helpful in that moment. It's really about helping with your immediate needs. That lays the foundation. It may not be quote depth work right then, but you're laying foundations for that secure base for that attachment. Another thing that can be really helpful is that as we've talked about, as from your understanding of trauma, is that trauma can create a disorganized sense of experience, that the ability to tie feelings to words and in turn to actions can be impoverished and impaired. So giving people a language, giving people a scaffold onto which to hang those feelings and those ideas that they experience, but sometimes can't give words to. I think it's Jessica Benjamin who uses the term the unthought known for this, the idea that we have these feelings and ideas that are known to us, that we experience in a particular way, but don't always have the ability to give a verbal construct to. Not that everything needs to be that.
We do have a question now. It says in the chat box, if there is time, how would you suggest we be mindful of attachment and trauma history when screening for substance use disorders or intimate partner violence, particularly with folks that are pregnant and parenting?
Okay. All right. Is that Shelley's question, or is that
No, I think that's someone else, and then I think Shelley has a question.
okay? Let me cogitate on that for a minute. Okay.
Yep.
Shelley.
Hi, Ed. Sorry, I couldn't unmute. I was curious. My question is similar to Pam's. I think with our population, particularly around pregnant and parenting folks, we run into a real challenge where these folks are coming into treatment with significant trauma, like you've spoken to, and they're also learning how to parent successfully. And in many of these cases, we have the interface with Department of Children and Families and really looking at assessing for that parent-child bonding. And it really, in cases, sometimes becomes a perfect storm where at times, if that child and mother dyad are separated out of concern for safety, it sort of complicates these additional pieces where the child is removed. And so I guess it's a very complex situation. I was just curious if you had thoughts specifically to sort of navigating that with the additional layer of child welfare, because I think we've seen sort of an uptick in removals at times. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, wow, this is exactly what we sort of grapple with on a day-to-day basis. And so just wanted to sort of throw that out there and get your insight on that.
Okay. Well, okay. So I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit, because these are really good questions, and they speak to similar issues. I mean, and one of the complicating factors, even more so, is that y'all who are there to help can be seen by the parent and by the child as interlopers, as sort of the enemy from which to conceal things, out of a sense of wanting to keep people safe. And that's a really hard position to be in. To the extent that you can try to meet concrete needs, again, that's sort of a way of getting yourself in there. They're not going to trust you. I mean, they're just not, because you are an agent of the state. None of us want to be told that we're not taking care of our kids or in a safe way. I mean, it's for many people, not everybody, but for many people, one of the ways that we shape our identity is by what kind of parents we are. We're good parents, and to hear that challenged is narcissistically injuring. One way of using this set of ideas to frame this would be something like this. And again, I'm paraphrasing here, and I'm being really, sort of distilled for the sake of time here. Acknowledging people's suffering, acknowledging people's journey, to say, you come here by a hard road, and the things that you've experienced leading up to having this child would make it hard for anybody to be a parent, because part of how we know how to be parents, part of how we know how to take care of young children, is by what we experienced. And to prevent your child from going through some of the things that you've gone through, we want to provide you with some of these things, or even just sort of normalizing some of raising young kids is hard. Oh my God, emotionally, physically, all of that. And that not every challenge, not every experience of being challenged or feeling challenged is a demonstration of one's incompetence, because part of the dynamic that you are in with people who are dealing with the system is that there's enormous pressure to look as good as possible and to minimize the sense that you're doing anything wrong, which in this paradoxical way can often lead to a a presentation which is transparently false, and creates this vicious cycle where, you know, you're trying to act good, which doesn't look good, which makes people look, you know, respond as if it's not good. Being able to normalize that raising kids is hard. And the fact that you may be struggling in a certain way doesn't mean that you're an incompetent parent. It just means that you've got a kid who's got, you know, it means you've got a kid. It means that you're raising a child. And this invites a certain vulnerability, so it's hard, particularly in a situation where one's defensiveness can be and suspiciousness can be so high, that to normalize how hard raising a child is, to give people some sense of that there's breathing room to feel overwhelmed without conceding that you can't take care of a child. And that in some ways asking for help and accepting help is a way of demonstrating your competence, because it means that you're doing what's necessary to do the best that you can. I don't know if that helps or not, but
I think it's really validating. I'll just throw out there, as a parent of a 3.5-year-old, I think that sometimes we assume that others are going to have this this parenting thing sort of under their thumb, and it's hard. And there's a lot of innate challenges that we all go through. So I think normalizing and validating that experience is huge. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness about it. Thanks.
To the person who answered who texted the question, is that close? Is that?
Yeah, I think that was really helpful, actually. I just think humanizing it and making it okay for people to say it's difficult without saying they can't do it is really critical. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's talk about complicated attachment in the last 5 minutes or so. And I start this with a quote from Helen Fisher. Helen Fisher is a very famous anthropologist and has written on mate selection. And one of the things that I find this funny, is that I don't think that we're an animal that's built to be happy. We're an animal that's built to reproduce. And that's sort of her take on sort of dating and mating behavior. Oddly enough, the greeting card companies have not chosen to use this in Valentine's Day cards, but it speaks to Bowlby's thoughts about attachment through a survival lens. And so we work with a lot of folks who have complicated attachments, where the source of the stress, the source of the trauma, is someone that they depend on or love or feel very connected to. And this could be a partner or it could be a child, because raising kids is tough. So this becomes something we have to be thoughtful of. In relationship-based trauma, the attachment itself is often both a stress and a gratification. It's both something you need and you want, but are also scared of. As practitioners, we have to be thoughtful about how we align with patients, because our clients, because oftentimes we hear these incredible stories. You won't believe what he did this time. You won't believe what she said. And we're empathic and we're hearing, the person suffering, and it's very easy. It's very tempting. It feels very compassionate to say, "Oh my God, I can't believe they did that," and to join them in the frustration and the anger. The risk that we take with that is that this is still someone they love. This is someone they're still connected to. You're not their boyfriend or their girlfriend in this. You're a professional. And that the same person that they're expressing so much emotion about is someone that they're connected to, whether being mad at somebody is still being emotionally connected in a certain way. You don't stay mad at people that you're not wishing there was something different from. And so you have to be thoughtful about being empathic about the injury and being empathic with the feeling, while being empathic to the fact that this is still somebody that they care about. So you want to be cautious. If they come in and call, your client can come in and call their significant other every name that they want. You should not. Because on one level, and in a way that may not even be acknowledged or conscious, when you say, in your role as a provider and as a treater, when you say something about them, in some way you're saying something about them because they've chosen to be with that person. A different approach would be, rather than saying something about the essence of this other person, you observe the behavior. Okay, your spouse did this terrible thing, rather than your ex is a terrible person. They really made you feel bad in that moment, rather than saying that they're a bad person. It's a difference in emphasis. You're not talking about the essence of the person, which has implications for that person, your client's relationship to them, but you're acknowledging and recognizing the feeling that was created in your client by that person's actions, without necessarily making a comment about their essence in some ways. And we know that our clients continue relationships with people that we think could be pretty awful for them. And we know, if by no other means than through the story of Romeo and Juliet, that sometimes the best way to keep people together is to try to break them apart. People have to get there themselves. And our role is to give them a space within which to reflect upon that and get there. And it's moving from that first degree problem solving for, you're just thinking about the thing in front of you, to thinking a couple of moves out. So when your boyfriend or girlfriend, drops off the kids 3 hours later, doesn't bring them back, rather than calling the cops, rather than calling, what's the intermediate response? What's the other way that you can deal with this? If you're going to be, at their house next week and they say this, what's your response? Practicing, helping them formulate a response, helping them give words and ideas in advance of things that might happen, being able to model responses that are more adaptive and more likely to result in the things that they want than reacting in the moment, which may be aggressive or hurtful or work to their disadvantage in some way. Okay. You want to really be careful about, we're human beings. We work with folks sometimes who are in terrible situations, who refuse to leave terrible situations for various reasons. And it's easy to get mad at them for that. This is what you use your supervision for. Ultimately, if there's a clear imminent risk of somebody being harmed, obviously you intervene in that. But part of the reason I'm counseling a certain sensitivity about talking about the other is that if clients get the sense that we don't like their ex either, or their other person either, or feel like we're somehow being judgmental towards them for remaining in that situation, all you do is drive the conversation out of the room. Mm-hmm. They'll talk to you about everything else but that. Mm-hmm. You got to keep a space. Part of the reason for maintaining that respectful space is that so it stays in the room, so you can continue to work on it. And sometimes that means sitting with people who are making what you may feel and what may be objectively be terrible decisions. But if they're not talking to you about it, then you're not getting anywhere. Really running out of time.
Yes, we're down to the wire here, so we got about a minute to go here.
All right, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Working with the autobiography. Again, stories are more than the sequence of events. Offer some reframes in terms of challenging that narrative. When you rearrange the letters, sometimes you can change the message pretty substantially. Again, lending words and language, just being able to stick through tough times with people. That's hard, but you think about some of the people that we're closest to. They're not the people that have seen us at our best. They're the people who've seen us at our worst and stuck around anyway. And that's the opportunity that we have in this work, is that, you know, most of life happens outside the session, and our relationships can form that secure base where people check in and then sally forth into the world, experiment, and come back to that safe place. And given the work that we do, that's one of the principal ways we can be helpful and effective. And that's it. That's the talk.